The paperclip icon pulsed once on my screen and went still as if it had been holding its breath right along with me. Subject line, sealed evidentiary dossier. Rain's inquiry. Final. My cursor hovered. The office kept chattering in its familiar and different way. Printers humming, a receptionist laughing at something I couldn't hear. The thin percussion of keys tapping out other people's emergencies. All of it sounded distant, like noise screened through glass. I rested my left hand on the pen that had followed me since childhood, an obsidian fountain pen with a platinum nib. It had signed purchase agreements, political donations, endowments. Tonight, it steadied my wrist while I pressed send. The message shot off to District Attorney Mira Caldwell's secure inbox. The confirmation pop-up blinked, then vanished. In the black reflection of my monitor, a pale seam caught the light, an old line that ran from the corner of my eye to the edge of my jaw. I don't hide it. I don't explain it. But I never forget it either. My name is Elena Markham. I'm 28 and I work where numbers are asked hard questions. I was raised in a house where answers were staged like photo ops and paid for in cash. On the morning I turned 16, I learned a lesson I would keep: how accidents can be choreographed. I was at the kitchen island assembling French toast because it was one of the few things my father could not criticize into dust. He came in unshaven, already sour with last night's whiskey reaching across me for the kettle. His sleeve snagged the glass carafe cooling on the counter. Its sponge shattered. I had the useless reflex to catch it. A blade of glass found my cheek. I remember the smell of cinnamon and the sound a body makes when it hits tile. He didn't rush. He didn't apologize. He looked down at me the way he looked down at spreadsheets. Careless, he said, not loud. Then he stepped over the glittering mess and went to pour coffee. In the emergency department, my father, Sebastian Markham, brought out his public tone, measured, philanthropic, composed. His name is stamped in bronze over the pediatric wing entrance. The hospital owes him a gala every year. He told the attending physician that his daughter had knocked a dish off the counter and thrown her arm up in panic. He threaded the story with the kind of details liars use when they want to sound precise. I kept quiet and counted ceiling tiles. The doctor's questions pointed to me, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. The sutures went in. The discharge instructions went on a clipboard. Mr. Markham shook hands. No one asked a question that would have jeopardized a donation. Your mother didn't get to see you grow up, he told me later that night when the anesthetic wore thin and the cut began to burn. He wasn't drunk anymore. He was simply himself, cooled, persuasive. You will not embarrass me. The first time he blamed me for my mother's death, I was 10. The first time I understood the shape of his power, I was 16 and wearing a butterfly bandage over a new seam on my face. After that, I learned to move the house like a stagehand, where the floor planks complained which doors breathed when they opened, how his footsteps read in the hallway. I perfected the smile that reassures teachers and neighbors, and anyone who wants their afternoon to stay simple. But a scar is an argument you can't talk over. People look flinch, and then perform the polite trick of unbeholding. They accept the first easy explanation you hand them, not because it's convincing, but because the alternative is work. The line on my face altered the physics of rooms. It made strangers complicit. It also did something to my father that I hadn't seen before. Not remorse. He doesn't own that piece. It was fatigue edged with calculation, the comprehension that he had put a mark on me he couldn't erase or disguise. He understood risk. For the first time, I watched him struggle with it at home. That was the moment the outline of a different life coalesced. I didn't call it a plan, not at first. I called it homework. I finished high school a year early and signed my own paperwork whenever possible. Guidance counselors wrapped my decision in ribbon words like initiative and resilience. My father called it disobedience and staging. When Fairfield College, a New England liberal arts school with a ruthless scholarship committee, offered me a full ride, I did not tell him until the newspaper told everyone. The local reporter wanted a human interest piece about Daughters of the City rising. She asked for a photo on our front steps. Sebastian obliged the way he always does when a camera is involved. Shoulders back, chin settled into benevolent angle palm, heavy on my shoulder. The reporter's eyes caught my scar and blinked. "What happened there?" she asked gently, the way people ask when they want a soft answer. Childhood, my father said easily. She took a bicycle too fast down a hill. Fences come up quickly. I smiled because that was my job, and because the story was tidy and required no follow-up. Later that night, when the house had swallowed the caterer and the florist, and the last of the flashbulb was afterglow, he flicked the newspaper with 2 fingers. "You will decline." It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I won't," I said, and stood very still inside the silence that followed. It's a small skill learning not to fidget in the space where other people expect you to break. His mouth went flat. "Freedom is a costume that looks ridiculous on children. You need direction. You will take the position I arrange. You will attend the program I choose." "I'll attend the one who chose me," I answered. My voice was calm. Calm drives him wild. He didn't hit me. He didn't need to. He tried something different, a new draft. "People worry about you," he said, rehearsing the next lie. "You've always been intense, prone to dramatics. I would hate for anyone to mistake your episodes for cries for help." He let the word episodes hang in the air like a diagnosis that might be picked up and echoed. "I am fine," I told him. He smiled. "Of course you are. I am simply saying that if you ever decide to tell stories that harm me, people will assume the harm started inside you." That was the first time he auditioned the self-harm narrative without saying the words. He doesn't need to say them. He only needs to teach them to other mouths. I said what daughters say when they want to keep the peace long enough to pack. "I would never embarrass you. I went to Fairfield in August with 2 suitcases, a box of books nobody had given me, and the obsidian pen wrapped in a scarf. I majored in finance because the language of power is balance sheets and timing, and I minored in computer science because paper trails burn, but databases remember. Between seminars, I volunteered with a student housing collective using a different last name. I learned how municipal boards post agenda packets, how campaign donations attach to rezoning votes, how marketing pamphlets rename neighborhoods, how to cross-reference a shell company by address when the owners hide behind 7 layers of paperwork. My father builds things you can tour with a ribbon and a pair of giant scissors. He also builds structures no one photographs holding companies, pass-throughs, charities that donate to each other in loops that look like generosity from far away. Every week, I set up alerts and scrape filings. I wasn't collecting anecdotes. I was mapping. Holidays happen like rehearsals. I flew home to attend dinners where seating charts could have doubled as donor lists. I listened. I walked rooms. I cataloged names that acted as passwords in other circles. I never asked questions. I let people show off. When I needed money that didn't show on his budget, I worked. I interned at a boutique forensic accounting office where the partners taught me to follow impatience and numbers rounding errors that recur like nervous twitches. Journal entries tucked at quarter-end invoices with timestamps that never sleep. You see patterns most people don't. One of the senior associates told me. I almost laughed. Patterns were the first language in my house. By the time I graduated, the scar had paled from angry red to the color of old paper. I stopped covering it with makeup, not because I had healed, but because I had changed its job. It no longer hid me or exposed me. It reminded me to look closely. If you asked Sebastian to define me, he would not say my name. He would say daughter, like a brand line, a marketing asset, a piece that fits on the board. He never asks who I am when he can tell you what I am for. That difference is the crack where light gets in. On the week, the reporter's story ran. The emails started congratulatory notes from people whose signatures I recognized from campaign disclosures, invitations to tours of buildings my father had used as stage sets for himself. I saved them, sorted them, tagged them. I kept my face pleasant in the photographs, and my ears open at the parties, and my mouth shut in the rooms where decisions had already been baked. None of this looked like rebellion. It looked like a girl who had learned poise. It looked, if you didn't lean in, like obedience. By the time I moved into my first post-college apartment, a 2-room place with radiators that hissed like stage snakes, I had a timeline taped inside a closet where visitors wouldn't see it. It ran across 3 sheets of butcher paper. Acquisitions, campaign cycles, zoning variances. Colored string connected properties to city council votes, to the charities that sponsored the gala, where my father always made a speech about commitment and legacy. At the edge of the paper, a column for names. Another for dates when those names intersected with checks. I thought of the obsidian pen and how heavy it had felt in my hand when I clicked send tonight. It used to anchor his hand steady when he signed away other people's seasons. Now it anchors mine. Outside my office window, the street lamps were cutting circles on rain-dark asphalt. My inbox pinged an automated server message confirming receipt from the DA's office. I locked my screen, slid the pen into the lining pocket of my bag and stood. In the mirror by the elevator, the seam along my cheek caught the fluorescent light for a sliver and went quiet again. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. I had done my homework. I had turned it in. Tomorrow, I start pulling the first brick. Elena Markham, 28 Toigui, Hosa Chunku Ku Kui, đến biên ly Mira Caldwell, rồi nhìn thấy vết sẹo của in trong màn hình tối dấu ấn từ tai nạn, được dàn dựng năm 16 tuổi, khi cha cô Sebastian Markham cố tình để mọi thứ trở thành lời của cô. Từ đó, Elena hiểu cách quyền lực vận hành lời nói bóng bay thiện nguyện quan hệ và sự đồng lõa vì ngại sự thật. Cô tốt nghiệp sớm danh học bổng Fairfield College, bất chấp việc cha muốn kiểm soát lộ trình. Trước truyền thông, Sebastian dựng nên câu chuyện tai nạn trẻ con, thậm chí gieo mầm luận điệu bất ổn cảm xúc để phủ đầu nếu cô nói ra sự thật. Elena im lặng để chuẩn bị học tài chính ngôn ngữ của quyền lực học khoa học máy tính dấu vết sờ, không biết cháy thực tập kế toán pháp y, tham gia nhóm nhà ở bang tên khác từ thu thập và lập bản đồ mới liên hệ giữa công ty vỡ tài trợ chính trị và các quyết định quy hoạch có lợi cho tập đoàn của cha. Sau khi ra trường, Elena dán một dòng thời gian bí mật trong tủ mua bán tài trợ phiếu bầu, tên tuổi bằng chứng gián tiếp. Vết sẹo không còn là thứ để che giấu, mà là lời nhắc phải nhìn kỹ. Đêm nay, chiếc bút máy Obsidian từng ký các thỏa thuận của cha lại nằm trong tay cô khi bầm gửi. Cô đã nộp bài tập. Ngày mai cô sẽ gỡ viên gạch đầu tiên. Kết fan 1 sẵn sàng nối mạch sang phần 2, bạn đã nói. Tiếp tục viết phần 2 của câu chuyện với khoảng sở tư đã tính toán ở trên bảng tiếng Anh. Lưu ý, sau phần 2 sẽ còn viết tiếp phần 3. ChatGPT đã nói, đã suy nghĩ trong 53 Part 2, English, 1, 150 words. The elevator sighed me down to the street, and the city answered with wet tire noise and sodium vapor halos. The dossier was gone, no unsending, no edit. I walked home with the pen in my pocket, and a steadying thought in my head the work that brought me to tonight didn't start in an office. It started the first time I learned how a room rearranges itself for a powerful man. If part 1 of my life was homework, part 2 was learning to file it in the right place. 2 summers before I took the job that would matter, an orientation coordinator handed me a laminated badge and a pamphlet titled Financial Integrity Bureau Mission and Scope. The state attorney's building was newer than our courthouse and less romantic drop ceilings machine coffee cubicles with plastic dividers that collected static. I liked it immediately. Romantic rooms create myths. Fluorescent lights create memos. Markham Elena, a voice asked. A compact man with an impeccable tie and a careful gaze held out his hand. Rafiq Banerjee, unit chief. We shook hands. He walked me past a map of the state dotted with pins. We chased public money crimes procurement schemes, grant fraud tax evasion tied to shell entities. Your background says numbers don't intimidate you. Only when they pretend to be something they're not, I said. He smiled without showing teeth. You'll do fine. Doing fine here meant learning procedures that don't make it into television. How to request bank records without tipping off a target. How to keep a chain of custody unbroken when a thumb drive moves through 3 desks. How to route an anonymous tip through intake so a defense attorney can't argue it was manufactured. If you are patient with copy machines, the law will sometimes reward you. I logged every case and asked small questions that didn't change outcomes, but strengthened processes. When a file crossed my desk that brushed too close to my last name, I recused without drama and without explanation. I wasn't here to grandstand. I was here to endure. Outside business hours, I trained. 2 nights a week at a martial arts studio that emphasized economy over elegance, an instructor who corrected posture more than he praised form. Don't seek the strike, he told us. Seek the distance. I relearned my body as terrain I could manage. When I slept, the scar along my cheek felt quiet, less like a flare and more like a seam that had done its job and held. Graduation had come and gone before that. The summer after Fairfield, my father threw an event that could be passed off as a family celebration, but functioned as brand maintenance. The venue was the penthouse glass metal views, arranged like proofs of concept. There were flowers that looked expensive in a way you can't count, and a guest list that resembled a donor roll if you squinted. He raised a flute. To Elena, he said the benevolent smile fitted perfectly over the sharpness that lived underneath. She has been offered a junior analyst position with Gray & Weller, premier firm, an excellent start, polite applause, cameras. I let them finish clapping before I spoke. I'm honored, I said into the room, but I've accepted an offer from the Financial Integrity Bureau. There were party laughs, thin surprise tuned to the key of "this will make a good story later." My father set his glass down with a sound that was smaller than the change in air pressure that followed. After the guests left and the dishware retreated down the service corridor, he met me in the kitchen where expensive stone pretended to be useful. He didn't waste greetings. "You'll decline," he said softly, like it was a generosity not to raise his voice. "No," I said just as soft. He reached without thinking, reflexes honest, and I watched his arm lift in a movement my body remembered with more clarity than I would have admitted. I did not step back. I raised my hand, caught his wrist, and held it there. Not a struggle. A pause. "Don't," I said. He stilled. His eyes sharpened like a man revising a contract in real time. Then he withdrew, reassembled his face, chose a different tactic. "People care about you," he said, selecting concern the way a speaker chooses a podium. "They worry when you become theatrical. You have a history of intensity. I would be sorry if someone misread that as instability." There it was, the test balloon of a story he could loft into rooms I wasn't in. An old lie in a new suit. "I'm steady," I said. He smiled with only one half of his mouth. "Of course. I'm telling you how it will sound. It is an odd relief when a person shows you their tools. You can build around them." I began at the bureau on a Monday. By Wednesday, I had a cheap corkboard pinned inside a cabinet so colleagues wouldn't see it, and by Friday, I had mapped out the workflow that turns a tip into a subpoena, into a spreadsheet, into a conversation with a weary assistant manager who doesn't know he's important yet. My caseload was ordinary in the way that matters: school procurement irregularities, a clinic that billed late-night hours, no one worked a grant that paid for equipment that never shipped. Every case taught me the same lesson: fraud hates details. The first interference arrived as a suggestion. The Bureau's HR manager forwarded an email so carefully worded it squeaked. A prominent civic group one my father underwrote was starting a fellowship for promising young professionals and wished to second me there for a year to broaden community perspective. The stipend was generous. The office would be in the same building as Markham Urban Development. I printed the email, stapled it to my conflict log, and walked it to Chief Banerjee. He read it, placed the printout perfectly parallel to his legal pad, and looked at me. "Do you know where this comes from?" "I have a guess," I said. He nodded. "I'll escalate. In the meantime, you decline with thanks." I did. The second interference came through a different channel, an anonymous ethics complaint that suggested I had undisclosed mental health struggles that might impair my judgment. The complaint included no specifics, but the vocabulary matched my father's. Episodes. Theatrical. Intense. Our compliance officer closed it for lack of substance and documented it thoroughly anyway. Paper shields are still shields. 2 weeks later, District Attorney Mira Caldwell asked me to stop by her office. She was not theatrical either. She wore a watch that looked cheap and a suit that did not ask you to admire it. "I've seen the fellowship offer and the complaint," she said. "I've documented both," I said. She studied me without smiling or frowning. "Is there anything else I should know?" I considered the versions of the truth available. The one that would make me feel vindicated was not the one that would help me most. "My father is very visible," I said. "He has interests that overlap indirectly with our work. He likes control. He values narrative." "That is an elegant way to say he might meddle," she said. "He might." I agreed. "I won't involve myself in any matter that even leans in his direction. If anything comes near, I'll wall it off and bring it to you." She tapped the watch face like she was reminding herself of time. "Good. We'll set formal guardrails, a standing recusal protocol with my sign-off and a notification to our ethics office about potential outside pressure. If anything escalates, I want it documented contemporaneously and delivered to me not after the fact." "Yes, ma'am." She paused. "If you ever decide this is personal, you'll tell me and you'll step away." Justice hates motives almost as much as fraud hates details. I kept my voice even, understood. Guardrails in place, I worked. I stayed late because the building got quieter after 5, and I liked how paper makes a different sound when a floor empties. I learned where to look in bank statements for the impatience of someone stealing microtiming that betrays a hand that thinks it is invisible. I learned that shell companies repeat names the way careless people repeat stories with tiny overlaps that are easy to miss until you stop reading them as noise and start reading them as music. I handed off any line that bent toward Markham entities. My colleagues learned quickly that I was both useful and not greedy. That keeps you in the room. When I needed the antidote to spreadsheets, I spent Saturday mornings at a housing legal clinic under the name Elena Hale. I watched a mother of 2 cry onto a stack of notices that used words like refurbishment to mean, "We want you out by the end of the week." I saw men whose jobs vanished when a warehouse moved 3 miles further from the bus line. The work gave my maps blood. It also reminded me that my father's empire didn't just convert neighborhoods, it converted language. He didn't evict people, he optimized assets. He didn't buy votes, he created public-private partnerships. If you control the nouns, you win before you start. Around the time leaves began to burn off the courthouse trees, my father threw another event, this one called a Founders Circle Supper, for a foundation that sponsored music programs and also incidentally packaged reputations in glossy brochures. I attended because not attending would have been a story. I wore a dress I could move in, and shoes I could run in, and a face that could be photographed. At our table, a city council member whose campaign had championed density done right toasted visionaries who build what others only imagine. My father accepted the compliment and adjusted it to his advantage as always. He leaned toward me later in the lull between speeches. "The Bureau will tire you," he murmured. "You're too sharp to waste on paperwork. Gray and Weller will revisit their offer if I ask. There's a unit in compliance there that would suit you." "Compliance is where you put smart people when you want to claim you tried," I said, keeping my lips barely parted, so the photographer across the room could still catch me smiling. He chuckled. "You've learned aphorisms." "Good. Learn this one, 'The ladder you think you're climbing is against the wrong wall.'" I set my glass down. "I moved the ladder," I said. His eyes flicked to the scar, then back to the room calculating the angles. He did not push. He didn't need to, not, if he could let gravity do the work. 2 days later, Banerjee called me in and showed me a letter from a law firm that represented one of our targets. The letter alleged selective aggression and hinted at impropriety in our unit's case selection. The allegation was nonsense, but it signaled pressure. Mira Caldwell sent back a reply that read like stainless steel and then came to stand in the doorway of my cubicle. "Keep your logs current," she said, "and drink water." I drank water. I kept my logs current. When anonymous emails arrived that tried to humble me by misspelling my name or implying I'd been hired for reasons other than competence, I archived them because I refused to curate other people's fantasies. By winter, a pattern had emerged in my casework commercial properties, flipping to new holding companies just before zoning meetings, donations arriving at campaign committees 48 hours before votes. None of the entities I traced shouted Markham not directly. That was the point. But the addresses rhymed. The Council of Record rhymed. The donors at the gala rhymed with the signatures on deeds. I sent the lines that might intersect with my father to colleagues in other units, each handoff clean, each email clipped of adjectives. If you'd looked at my apartment wall, you'd have thought I was making art. Butcher paper in 3 columns, money motions mouths. Money was documents, wire transfers, escrow disbursements, invoices. Motions were government agenda packets, variance requests, minutes. Mouths were people who introduced whom, who thanked whom, who stood where when the ribbon was cut. In red pencil, I marked dates when photographs, ballots, and bank entries overlapped within 72 hours. I didn't need a perfect picture. I needed enough shape to know where to press. The press came earlier than I expected. One of my routine cases, a contractor double billing a county school system, bloomed into something else when the contractor's outside accountant tried to bargain. Off the record, he said to the ADA on the case, "My client has worked projects with a developer whose name you'd recognize. If I share those files, can we talk about leniency?" The ADA shut him down properly. No off-the-record deals, no fishing expeditions. but the mention slid across my desk because my name was on the intake rotation and because someone wanted to see how I'd handle gravity aimed at my feet. I flagged the file, wrote a note, potential for conflict, developer ties unclear, and moved it. Then I walked the note physically to Mira. She read it and met my eyes. "Good," she said. "Let someone else chase that one. You stay boring and excellent." Boring and excellent is not glamorous, but it is a strategy. It turns you into furniture indispensable and unremarkable. People forget furniture's the shape a room takes. During this long, flat season of work, my father tried kindness twice. He left a box on my doorstep with a note written in his public hand. "For your place." Inside a watch expensive and tasteful, engraved with the initials I had stopped using. I set it in a drawer. A week later, an apartment broker called with news of a unit in a building I could not afford at a price I could. I told her I liked my radiators. He did not like my radiators. He liked narratives. He tried another. A mutual acquaintance stopped me after a community panel and relayed concern. "Your father worries," she said, pressing worries as if it were tender. "He says you're carrying too much. You know how young women burn out." "I hydrate," I said. It was not the expected response. She blinked and adjusted to a new script. "Well, if you ever needed a sabbatical, his foundation could fund a research year." I thanked her and put a fresh page in my log. On a raw night when the river threw mist at the sidewalks and everything felt undecided, I stood at my apartment window and counted lights. Behind some of those lights were families packing boxes because a lease had become a letter. Behind others were people toasting promotions earned by knowing what to ignore. The obsidian pen lay on my desk like a relic and a tool. The corkboard was crowded. The map had grown hands. What I didn't know yet was that someone else had a map too. Someone who had lived inside the machine and saved pieces as if he knew one day he'd need them. I wouldn't hear his name for months, not like this, not as an equal entering a story, but the story was already walking toward me. On the day the Bureau won a quiet plea in a non-profit skimming case and the office celebrated with cupcakes that tasted like sweet chalk. Banerjee looked up from his screen and said, "You keep making complicated things look simple." "Complicated things aren't offended when you don't flatter them," I said. "True," he answered and went back to work. I checked my inbox one more time before shutting down. A message waited from M. Caldwell. "Come by in the morning. We have a structural change to discuss." Structural changes in our building meant promotions, reassignments, or storms coming. I slipped the pen into my pocket and told myself again that distance is a choice you practice until it becomes a fact. Later, when people ask where the beginning of the end started, they expect me to say the day of the arrest. That's the headline. The beginning is smaller. It is a hand paused midair in a kitchen. It is a watch left in a drawer. It is a letter logged in email declined, a boundary kept without commentary. The next morning, I would sit in Caldwell's office while she described a firewall with my name in it. A firewall built not to shut me out but to keep me from burning. A firewall that would hold when a man named Oliver Hales, once my father's executive assistant, now a countdown on borrowed time, slid a small drive across a chipped cafe table and said very quietly, "I kept things for when someone was ready to look." District Attorney Mira Caldwell's office had the same view it always had: brick, a sliver of river, a billboard that changed products every quarter, but never its confidence. She motioned me to the chair and slid a single-page memo across her desk. "Effective today," she said. "We're erecting a formal firewall. You will not be the line ADA on any matter that could involve Markham Urban Development or associated entities. You will not execute warrants. You will not interview witnesses whose testimony touches your father. You will, however, be the architect of the pattern. You're good at patterns." "Understood," I said. "Good. Ethics already has the recusal protocol. Anything close comes to me in real time, not end of week." "Yes, ma'am." She watched me for the length of one of the second hand's quiet leaps. "One more thing. If at any point your judgment feels warmer than you expect, tell me. Distance isn't a moral pose. It's a safety feature." I nodded. She held my eyes until she believed me, then tapped the memo. "Welcome to Atlas." Atlas wasn't a case file so much as a scaffolding, an internal code name, a set of tags, a private folder structure whose permissions were tightened by IT before my coffee cooled. The first week under the new system, I did what I always did. I moved paper. I mapped money. I wrote questions that sounded like statements. The board in my cabinet gained strands. Money Motion's mouths spread like a quiet lattice. 2 Fridays later, an email slid into my private account, the one with no public footprint, and an address only 4 people knew. Subject, a cup of coffee and some conscience. The sender was a throwaway string. The body contained a time a cafe in a neighborhood between 2 worlds, and a sentence that would have looked maudlin in any other context. My name is Oliver Hales. I used to work for your father. I kept things in case I ever decided to stop pretending I didn't know. I think now is the time. I read it twice, then printed it and walked it to Caldwell. She read it once and looked up. Bring someone, she said. And bring a chain of custody form. Hales chose a corner table with a view of the door and his back to the wall. He was late 50s, maybe early 60s, the age men start to look like their own biographies. His suit had been expensive a few years ago. His tie was perfect. His hands shook just enough to make me wonder if it was illness or adrenaline. Elena, he said, standing part way as if the old etiquette still deserved respect. Thank you for coming. This is Ada Banerjee, I said, gesturing to Rafiq, who had insisted on playing the quiet shadow, and now did it with professional grace. Hales nodded to him, then to me. I worked for your father 15 years, he said. Executive assistant by title, quartermaster by habit. I scheduled, I shielded, I smoothed. I told myself I was keeping the ship afloat for all the families that ship employed. I also told myself little lies about accidents and misunderstandings because the big lies were too heavy to carry. He pulled a small, battered drive from his pocket and set it on the table like a confession. I placed an evidence bag beside it without touching the drive and slid the chain of custody form to the edge of the table. Banerjee turned on a pocket recorder and stated the date, time, location, and names. Hales listened, eyes on the form. I started keeping copies after a kitchen morning, he said, not looking at my face and somehow seeing it anyway. It was the day with the cinnamon. I told myself I was keeping records in case Sebastian ever turned on me and I needed to bargain. That's what I said to myself so I could sleep. The truth is simpler. I knew someone would need them. I hoped it wouldn't be you. I didn't reach for the scar. I let the air between us hold it. What's on the drive, I asked. Emails, ledgers, a voice memo app I use like a conscience, photographs. Not of you, he added quickly, as if he wanted to spare me a fresh indignity. Of documents, of things that were about to be shredded. The last 5 years are thorough. Before that, it's spotty or whatever I could gather without being noticed. Why now, Banerjee asked. Hales smiled without his eyes. Because my doctor stopped using euphemisms. 6 months, give or take. I would like to go lighter. We logged the device, sealed it, and signed. Hales turned to me when the form was complete. I should have done more, he said. I should have been braver earlier. You're here now, I said. It wasn't absolution. It was a fact. Some facts are heavy enough to serve as mercy. Back at the bureau, our digital forensics tech Serena Cho treated the drive like a puzzle she'd been hungry for. She cloned it, hashed it, wrote the hash again onto paper, as if ink could make the math feel more permanent. The folder tree unfurled like a map. Operations Political Legal Community. A polite word that in my father's lexicon translated to leverage. Within those invoice scans labeled with whimsy, a habit of assistants who get bored. Calendars with color coding. You could live inside email archives thick with a virus of plausible deniability. I moved through the material like a surveyor, not a daughter. Extract, link, date, corroborate. We compared internal ledgers to filed statements. We matched metadata to meeting minutes. We transcribed voice memos politely recorded the day after. In one, Hales muttered the exact script of a call with a deputy commissioner who needed a nudge to put a rezoning change on the agenda. In another, my father practiced lines for a gala speech smoothing impact into legacy and legacy into commitment, as if word choice itself could write checks. Midway through the first weekend, I found a memo on risk mitigation that read like a seminar in soft blackmail. Bullet points listed donors' pet projects, council members' favored charities, a judge's passion for restoring historic organs. The last bullet, maintain narrative regarding EM. Concern for well-being, youthful volatility, erratic. No specifics. Seed via surrogates. Do not overuse. I printed it twice, one for the file, one for my refrigerator door, where it would remind me why distance mattered. We fed the best pieces into a skeleton. Dates, dollar amounts, names of shell entities that pointed back to holding companies with names like Wind and Stone and River. We traced a pattern of cash moving in loops through foundations that sponsored children's music while underwriting adults' silence. Each loop came to rest near a vote, a variance, a land purchase that turned eviction notices into tenant outreach. Caldwell reviewed the summary with the wall stillness she employed when her approval meant something. "You've built me a pattern," she said. "Now we need people." People arrived when paper became pressure. The first was a mid-level operations manager who brought a lawyer with a haircut that telegraphed cooperation. The second was a city engineer spooked by a federal audit rumor. The third was a bookkeeper who'd been promised a promotion that never materialized. Each one added a contour, a date, a phrase overheard on a speakerphone. None of them wanted to be heroes. They wanted to be less afraid. We convened a grand jury under a judge who disliked theatrics almost as much as Mira did. I didn't enter the room. I built binders that made it easy for the ADA who did. I wrote questions that began with "walk us through" and "help us understand," because why invite stories while how requires facts. When witnesses contradicted each other, the contradictions narrowed where the truth likely lived. When they aligned, a nerve lit up on my map. We worked quietly. We worked long. Outside our building, the city continued to sell itself in color, and my father continued to be photographed beside ribbon loops. He tried nothing loud. His people sent nothing traceable. He had learned restraint when he learned risk. I honored the lesson by refusing to give him an adversary he could point at and name. The first warrants were subpoenas with nice letterhead. The second were search warrants with Dawn attached. Caldwell scheduled them in a braid to keep defense counsel from outpacing us offices, a storage facility, in a warehouse district, the home office of a consultant whose invoices favored adjectives over deliverables. I remained behind glass. A room down the hall became the operations hub, monitors tuned to radio traffic, and shared drives, a whiteboard for assignments that made the disorder look choreographed. At 6:42 a.m. on a gray Tuesday, an agent's voice threaded the room, bag and tag complete at River Street. Copying drives, sending chain logs now. At 7:03, another storage unit, 487, contains file boxes labeled with project codes consistent with ledger notation. Serena Cho's cursor pried open directories like oysters. Rafiq Banerjee stood with his arms folded and counted nothing out loud. Caldwell watched the whiteboard like a chess clock. At 9:11, the message came without drama. Primary subject located at Markham HQ. Warrant executed. Subject cooperative. We're bringing him in for processing. There was no cheer. There were checked boxes and fresh tasks, and a new column labeled media because the world would want a statement. I watched my father arrive on a monitor that did not care about reputation. He looked smaller than the photo ops. Rooms shrink people who can't control them. He didn't ask for me. He asked for counsel. Bail was inevitable. The amount would make headlines, but not change his liquidity. By 4 p.m., a judge had set conditions, a bondsman had earned a fee, and my phone lit with a number I knew before I knew any numbers by heart. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Elena," he said. "Not darling, not honey, just my name the way people say a last move on a chessboard." "Mr. Markham," I said. "I would like to see you. That wouldn't be appropriate given the circumstances." "Elena." There was an edge to it, and under the edge something he rarely let anyone hear. "Please." A public restaurant lowers the temperature of bad habits. I chose one with polished wood and enough daylight to keep cameras honest. He was already there with a glass of water he hadn't touched and a jaw that had learned new angles in a day. "You did this," he said when I sat. It wasn't a question. "The evidence did this," I said. I kept my hands on the table where we could both see them. "You gathered the evidence, you sharpened it, against your father. I built a pattern and gave it to the people whose job it is to test patterns. They're testing it." He laughed once, surprised at how bitter it sounded. "One misfortune and a lifetime of ingratitude. You want the story to be that simple." "It isn't." "No," I said. "It's not simple. It's systematic." He leaned in. I could smell the mint he'd used to cover something. "You enjoyed this." "Don't say you didn't. You've been sharpening a knife for years." "The knife is a ledger," I said. "It has numbers on it." He let the mask slide, the one he saves for when doors are shut, and he thinks there are no microphones. No one will believe the rest, he said softly. The kitchen, the insinuations, your word against mine and my word weighs more. It did, I agreed. It doesn't now. His mouth compressed. Who helped you? People who prefer not to be dragged with you, I said. People who kept things. Oliver kept things. He blinked. A brief flutter quickly stilled. Oliver. He kept memos, emails, recordings of phone calls he memorialized the next day. He kept photos of documents before they were shredded. He kept a copy of your risk playbook, including the bullet where I am a narrative, not a person. And then he gave it to us. He stared at my face, and for the first time since I was 16, I watched him calculate and come up short. Oliver wouldn't, he said. It sounded like prayer and denial and habit. He would, I said. He did. He is also dying. Sometimes clarity comes with an end date. He reached for the old leverage. I still have friends. Some of them are named in the sealed indictments, I said, keeping my voice gentle so the words would land like facts, not threats. Some have already met with us. Some will meet with us tomorrow. Friends are utilities. Utilities get shut off. He gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening. I will destroy you, he whispered. Not loud enough for our neighbors to hear, and exactly loud enough for me to recognize a ghost. You don't have a tool left that works on me, I said, standing. You do have counsel. Use him. He looked at the scar, a reflex, a map he still believed he could fold. You're just like her, he said, a last shot that he thought would find a soft place. Thank you, I said. That's the kindest thing you've ever said to me. Outside, the winter light had the color of paper. Reporters were already constructing scaffolds of questions outside the courthouse steps. Caldwell gave a statement that contained nouns, verbs, and no adjectives. I went back to my office and wrote a memo that captured the meeting with my father in language so boring it was immune to theater. Then I walked to Serena's desk and watched her build a directory tree from the morning seizures. Inside one file folder labeled Community Partners, we found a spreadsheet that treated generosity like a ledger item. Rows for donation columns, for expected outcome cells that linked to calendar entries titled, Strategically, Lunch Council H. Ribbon Ward 3 School Roof, Golf Zoning Chair. On a tab called Narratives, a list of names sat beside words to deploy if those names became inconvenient, ambitious, unstable, naive, ungrateful. Beside EM, volatile, implied overworked needs rest. A formula at the bottom calculated cost per silence. I printed that sheet and set it under the memo on my refrigerator. I didn't keep it there to be angry. I kept it there because it is useful to remember how systems talk about people when they are alone. The grand jury moved faster than forecasts that took into account my father's resources. Pressure makes calendars elastic. Subpoenas turned into testimony. Testimony turned into corroboration. The pattern tightened until discretion stopped being an option. The day indictments were unsealed, the city's collective voice rose an octave and then stalled, as if a choir had lost its conductor and found its pitch at the same time. Banerjee walked past my cubicle and paused. You all right? He asked. I'm boring and excellent, I said. Good, he answered and meant it. In the evenings, I went home to my small apartment with the hissing radiators and the map that had started to look less like art and more like a route someone could follow. I slept harder than I expected and woke before the alarm, as if my body knew there was a new weight and wanted to get under it early. A week after the arrest, I received another email, this one from an account that was not a throwaway. Oliver. Hales wrote, I have more. Not much, but sharper. Coffee again. Also, I saw a doctor today. No euphemisms again. I would like to put this down while I can still lift it. He suggested the same cafe. I suggested a different one, 2 neighborhoods away. He agreed without offense. People who have decided to tell the truth don't care which table they use. We met in the late afternoon, when the light makes everything look temporary. He placed another small drive on the table and a manila envelope that looked old-fashioned enough to disguise its danger. This is the part I didn't keep on the network, he said. Handwritten notes. A list he dictated once when he was careless because he was triumphant. Call it a map of how to make officials nod without asking what they were nodding to. We logged it. We bagged it. He put his hands flat on the table and looked at me like a man closing a ledger. I told myself I stayed because jobs, he said. Because mortgages. Because if I left, he'd hire worse men. That's a story people like me tell. The truth is, I was afraid of losing the rooms where things happen. I liked being the person who could get the right document onto the right desk. That matters, but not the way I thought. It matters today, I said. He nodded. Good. Then I can go home. On my walk back, the city was doing its best impression of normal. People carried groceries. A bus driver argued gently with a passenger whose card wouldn't tap. Somewhere a radio played an old song that once belonged to the background of our kitchen, back when the scar was new, and everything in the house smelled like cinnamon and apology. I did not speed up. I carried the envelope like a fragile thing and like a weapon. Caldwell kept her promise to the process. She read the handwritten notes like a mathematician reads chalk on a board, checking, rechecking, testing the leap from symbol to proof. When she finished, she closed the folder, set it aside, and said, "We moved to arraignment, then we moved to trial." She paused, then added, "You will not try it." "I never intended to," I said. "No," she said, "but sometimes intention shifts under the weight of proximity." "I need you to remain the architect, not the advocate." I went back to my desk and opened a fresh document titled Preparation Trial Support Atlas. I listed exhibits, timelines, witness sequences. I translated complexity into sequences that a jury could follow without resenting the mapmaker. I avoided adjectives like I was allergic. When I finally closed my laptop that night, the office had thinned to the usual few. Serena, who loved the hum of servers. Banerjee, who loved an orderly list. A junior ADA who loved being first at something even if that something was the last to leave. I stood at the window and watched taillights move like a quiet procession. In the glass, the seam along my cheek drew a small line across a larger reflection. Part 4 would belong to a courtroom, the choreography of questions, the weight of sworn words, the way a verdict changes air pressure. Part 3 belonged to paper, and to the people who had carried it sometimes with trembling hands, sometimes with practiced indifference. We had taken a story that lived in private rooms and given it a public address. Before I left, I stopped at the refrigerator in my apartment and pinned one more page beneath the others, a half-sheet where I had written in blunt, unlovely letters the rules that had gotten me here. Document in the moment. Let nouns do the work. Keep the distance you earned. When patterns say press, press. Then I turned off the kitchen light and let the dark make the apartment simple. Tomorrow, I would iron a suit that did not ask for compliments, sit in the back row of an arraignment, and watch my father hear his name in a register he had never trained for. The arraignment began with the ordinary theater of oaths. The clerk's voice flattened names into syllables. The judge reminded everyone that this room belonged to law, not legend. I sat in the back row with a notebook, a pen that knew my hand, and a face polite enough to be invisible. When the charges were read, Sebastian kept his eyes on the defense table, as if the wood grain might offer a better story. Jury selection took 3 days. The defense struck anyone who had ever volunteered at a shelter. The prosecution struck anyone who thought philanthropy was proof of character. When the 12 were finally sworn, they looked like a cross-section of a city, deciding whether it would keep lying to itself. The state opened with nouns and numbers. No adjectives. The assistant district attorney Stein, a methodical litigator with a teacher's patience, walked the jury through loops of money that masqueraded as generosity donations to foundations that funded music lessons on Saturday and zoning variances on Tuesday, consultants who billed for community alignment and delivered introductions at golf courses where votes were silently arranged. Exhibits appeared in the sequence we'd rehearsed bank ledgers minutes. Emails rescued from the polite purgatory of archive folders. The community partners spreadsheet went up on a screen, cells lit like a grid of favors. On the Narratives tab, a column of names with the words to be deployed if those people became inconvenient. Next to EM, volatile implied overwork needs rest. The jurors leaned forward as if reading a private dictionary. The defense tried a different lexicon. They said overzealous, politically motivated, selective. They held up glossy photographs of ribbon cuttings and asked whether goodness could be measured in grant checks. When they wanted to drag me into the room without using my name, they suggested that certain familial dynamics had created institutional bias. Stein let them gesture, then pointed the jury back to the ledger. "If you're lost," he said, "follow the dates." Oliver's testimony arrived as a recording taken under oath a week before trial, his voice thinner but steadier than it had been at the cafe. He recounted conversations with titles and times. He explained the color coding of calendars and the shorthand in emails that stood in for instructions no one wanted to write. On cross, the defense tried to paint him as a bitter employee bargaining with mortality. He didn't bargain. He named. He apologized to no one and everyone. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when people tell the truth without adjectives. Witnesses followed a city engineer whose handwriting slanted toward fatigue, a bookkeeper who finally admitted she'd been asked to clean invoices, a counsel aide who had never said quid pro quo in her life but understood perfectly what a lunchtime nudge meant. Stein's questions began as planned with how, not why. The jurors took notes. The judge kept time. Sebastian did not testify. He didn't have to. His attorneys called character witnesses who preferred gala lighting to fluorescent bulbs. They praised jobs created and roofs repaired. Stein stood for 2 minutes and asked each one the same thing. "On this date, did you read this ledger entry?" When they said no, he said thank you and sat down. When the last exhibit had been admitted and the last objection had deflated, closing arguments arrived without theatrics. Stein traced the pattern one last time, an outline simple enough to fit in a pocket. Money motions mouths. "You do not have to be angry," he told the jury. "You only have to be sure." The defense warned of a future where success would be criminalized and ambition mistaken for malice. They asked the jury to rescue a reputation from a storm of misinterpretations. No one said my name. Deliberations took less than 2 days. When the foreperson stood, she held the paper with both hands, as if verdicts had a measurable weight. Guilty on 12 of 16 counts, conspiracy, bribery, tax fraud, obstruction. Not guilty on charges that required proving thoughts instead of actions. The room exhaled. Sebastian stared at a spot just past the jury box and didn't blink. Sentencing came a month later, after pre-sentence reports and letters from people who still believed the city should be grateful. The judge spoke in the careful voice of someone who knows every word will be quoted. "Philanthropy is not armor," he said. "Public good does not license private harm." He pronounced 23 years in state prison parole eligible after 15. The defense asked for a stay. Denied. A bailiff nodded to another bailiff. The cuffs clicked, dull and unmistakable. For the first time in years, my father looked at me. The expression wasn't remorse. It was surprise at the failure of a tool he had always trusted. Outside, cameras breathed. Caldwell gave a statement with verbs and no garnish. "The jury found the facts," she said. "We respect their verdict." Reporters angled for me. I gave them a sentence they could print without edits. The record speaks for itself. Then I went home and took the memo from my refrigerator door and put it in a folder labeled "Done." Oliver died 3 months later. I sat beside his bed in a hospice room with a window that pretended to be a painting. He was lighter still, exact. "You carried it well," he whispered, eyes finding the seam on my cheek and then choosing deliberately to look at the rest of my face. "Put it down when you can." I held his hand until the room announced in the gentle way those rooms do that he had gone. I left the bureau the following spring, not in protest, in completion. I wrote my resignation like a ledger, what I had learned, what I had built, what would outlast me there. Caldwell shook my hand in the doorway and said, "You kept the distance that mattered." Banerjee nodded once and returned to his lists. With a portion of assets the court designated untainted money that hadn't walked through the crimes, I established a foundation and gave it my mother's name, the Lila Hart Fund. We pay for lawyers who are not frightened by donors' walls, and for investigators who know that fraud hides inside adjectives. We underwrite emergency rent for tenants made redundant by someone else's optimization. We teach people how to read public agendas like stories with foreshadowing. In the lobby, a plaque reads, "Let nouns do the work." 5 years passed. The city found a new scandal, then another. Buildings went up, came down, changed names. I visited the prison on a day when the sky had the color of concrete and the guard's jokes sounded too bright in the corridor. He walked into the visiting room, thinner hair, flattened by institutional time expression, composed for an audience of one. "Why are you here?" he asked, voice rough with disuse. "To remove a ghost," I said. He sat. "You came to say you won." "I came to say thank you," I answered, a flicker, anger warming to confusion. "For what could you possibly thank me?" "For the line," I said, touching the seam on my cheek with one finger. "It's a measure. Every morning I see it and recall that I survived a house built to make me small. I remember that the tools you use to bend the world can be repurposed to straighten it. The mark keeps me honest." He had no answer for that. Power understands leverage. It does not understand gratitude that doesn't ask for anything back. People ask sometimes if I will have the scar revised now that I can buy skill and time. I tell them that some edits belong to the living, not the past. The mirror in my hallway is cheap, the kind you buy when you're not trying to impress anyone. In the morning light from the east window drags a clean stripe across the glass. The seam catches it and then releases it like a horizon line someone forgot to finish. On my refrigerator, because some habits last, I keep a small card with the rules that got me here. Document in the moment. Let nouns do the work. Keep the distance you earned. When patterns say press, press. And one more I had to learn late, turn pain into infrastructure. The city will always have men who believe rooms rearrange themselves for them. It will always have people who would rather look away than ask a second question. But it also has clerks and coders and nurses and janitors and bookkeepers who know how to keep receipts. It has jurors who will follow dates instead of speeches. It has daughters who are not narratives. I slide the obsidian pen into my bag. I lock the door. The day waits ordinary and exact. The work is not a headline anymore. It is a sequence calls return grants approved to tenant whose boxes can stay stacked in the corner because the notice was rescinded. On the way out I pass the mirror and do not pause. The light does what it does. The line does what it does. And I do what I learned to do. I keep moving forward with both hands open. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.